Hi, this is Vinay. I am a PhD student at the Institute of Mathematical Sciences, Chennai. My poster is about studying the rheological response of binary mixture with large size dispersity. This work has been done with my PhD advisor Pinaki Chaudhary and our collaborator Jürgen Horbach at University of Düsseldorf. Our motivation to do this work is this paper where diffusive properties of a binary glass forming mixture has been studied. This is a 50-50 mixture. The bigger A particles are polydispersed while the smaller B particle, shown with black dots here, are of fixed diameter. The mean diameter ratio between the bigger and smaller species is close to 2.85. This system has been studied at fixed temperature by varying the density from a very small value to a very large value. Here we can see the diffusivity of the bigger species become very small as we increase the density, but a smaller particle diffusivity is even finite at very high density. So with increasing density, bigger particles become very slow, but smaller particles are still fast. This means there is a huge time scale separation between the dynamics of bigger and smaller species. So, our goal here is to understand the interdiffusive properties, which is the intermixing of the two subpopulations and its different dynamical consequences. Also, we want to understand how this binary mixture responds to some externally applied shear. To understand the interdiffusive properties, we measure the mean square displacement of the center mass of one of the subpopulations as different density of the system. And we see that using this definition, we can calculate DAB, which is the interdiffusion coefficient. The behavior of the interdiffusion coefficient is very similar to B particle diffusivity, that is, interdiffusion is finite even at very high densities, but A particles, bigger particles, diffusivity becomes very small. This presents some elusive picture because there is some relative motion between the two subpopulations, but one of the population is not showing some motion. So, in order to define the correct picture, we need to define different dynamical quantities with respect to their respective center mass, as we have done here for the case of mean square displacement of bigger species. So these dotted lines are the measurements with respect to their respective center mass, while the solid lines are conventional measurements. And we see here at high densities, these conventional measurements show finite diffusion, while these dotted lines show that these particles are almost stuck. Now, to understand the shear response, we apply fixed shear rates along the x direction of the system at different densities. So our control parameter here is the shear rate and the density of the system. So we see here initially some elastic type of response, and then there is yielding, and ultimately some non-equilibrium steady state is reached. Since we have already seen there is a huge time scale separation between the dynamics of bigger and smaller species, now it would be very interesting to see how this new time scale introduced in the form of shear rate competes with the two relaxation time scales of the two species. Now, to see the macro picture of the system, we plot the flow curves in using stress versus shear rate and viscosity versus shear rate. And we see here there is a Newtonian regime at very small density and very small shear rates. At very high density, we see there is an emergence of apparent yield stress, and there is a shear thinning, that is decrease in viscosity with increase in shear rate. To connect these macroscopic measurements with micro picture, we actually do the measurement of mean square displacement at different densities in the presence of shear and in the absence of shear. So these measurements in the presence of shear and absence of shear at very small density for bigger and smaller particles are almost similar. It means system is not responding to the shear, but here at some intermediate density we see that bigger particles start responding to the shear because they become slow, and smaller particles are not responding. At very high density, both bigger and smaller particles become slow and they both start responding to the shear. Now, to summarize, we have studied the interdiffusive property of the system, and we have also done the shear response. We have studied the shear response where we see density dependent response to the shear because of the time scale separation between the species, and we have also connected the microscopic observation with the macro response of the system. In order to discuss these results and many more results, please visit my poster. Thanks for your kind attention.